Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the HubScale podcast. Today I'm really excited to be discussing IoT security today with Ellen. Ellen, thank you first of all for joining me today. And I guess as by way of an introduction, would you, begin by giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yes. Hi, thanks for having me, David. So, Ellen Boehm, and I am the SVP of IoT strategy for a company called Keyfactor. And we are a cybersecurity software company that's been around for over 20 years. And we're in the business of public key infrastructure and certificates. And my whole world is really around the IoT side of that and how to apply those technologies and frameworks into connected devices, which are becoming more and more prevalent and more important when it comes to security. So I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction, Ellen. Appreciate that. And so I guess, I mean, it's a topic I wanted to do for a while, and I think who better to do it with than yourself. But to begin with, for those, I guess, who kind of don't know, or for my help, what is IoT? What do we mean by it?
Yeah, so IoT or Internet of Things, the way I think about it is you have devices, they could be something that's in your home or something that's in a business or something that runs part of our infrastructure like water or gas or electric. And so there's devices that perform operations that have traditionally been not connected to the internet. So now, when you take those things and you provide some sort of connectivity module or a way for that device to access a remote system, then it becomes, using the internet, then you can collect more data, you can remotely monitor and manage and, pull insights from what's happening. And so that's sort of what we're seeing here. And IoT as a philosophy is not new, and I think it's really on its way to being more and more widely adopted across a variety of industries. So people again are trying to move towards this mindset because they know that we can make things more efficient, we can save money, we can save time if we can remotely monitor and manage a lot of these different systems. So that's IoT kind of in a nutshell, is taking older, not connected things, putting some connectivity into them, and then being able to take and use the data from them in a way to make things better.
Great. So technology basically making our lives easier again then.
hmm In theory, yes. But in many cases, yes, it's fun to see it evolve.
Amazing. And can you give us like a few examples of maybe household items or things people would kind of come in contact with on a day-to-day basis or regular basis that are IoT devices?
Yes, yeah, and maybe I'll start with one that's from my background. I was in the lighting business, so my company it was way back, made street lighting, and we were moving traditional technology over to LED technology for energy efficiency. But then we also took the traditional solar sensors that would turn streetlights off and on with sunrise and sunset. That's a normal light sensor type thing. Well, we put electronics in there, we put a radio and an antenna, and made that a connected device. So we turned that into IoT so that cities could detect when their lights were out and more easily send maintenance crews to replace the lights or check it, if so that the city was safe, right? And areas were well lit. Also, the city was able to then adjust the level of light throughout the day, so that they could be watching their energy bills. So there's benefits to being able to understand what's happening with a fleet of devices if you're a municipality or you're a city that's sort of running some operation. And the same you can think of for your house. So I think more and more people these days have smart doorbells or cameras or lighting or switches. For example, in my house have a light that I have shut off every morning at 8:05 because that's after my kids leave, and it's just in case they don't shut the light off, which happens very often, and I don't want the light on upstairs. So for me, that's a benefit of something I can schedule. I know that when no one's there, I'm not wasting electricity. So all of those things are IoT. Maybe one more example, medical devices. So you can have an embedded pacemaker. You can have a lot of people, including some people in my family, have diabetes, conditions, and you can monitor and detect, the levels and how, how your body is responding to the treatments. All of that is trackable and traceable via a phone, via an app with alerts to tell you settings, and that's real time. And that is enabled by us taking these devices and being able to connect them and measure them much more frequently and real time.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And so IoT devices aren't necessarily a new concept or a new thing, but it seems that, on a daily or at least a weekly basis, there's more and more kind of articles going out about like the need to increase security of these IoT devices. So I guess could you talk us through that scenario and, why is there a mounting pressure on securing
Mhm.
these devices?
Yes, that is a great question. And I think it's because from a security perspective, there's always hackers or other people or entities trying to get into something for benefit of like financial benefit or power or something like that. So we as sort of the community of cybersecurity and the community of device makers should be thinking about how to protect the code that runs on the devices and how to protect the devices and the functionality of them, because we don't want someone to take them and use them in a negative way or to change the operation, and it could, back to the medical example, could harm a patient. Or if it's a vehicle, right? To be able to hack into a vehicle and change the way it's operating when it's driving fast down a freeway. Um, so those are things that we have to think about, because there are people that are constantly trying to attack and to get into any and all of these systems. And we often talk about how, think about a retail store, okay? There's probably a lot of connected devices, there's payment terminals, there's HVAC systems, there's, if they have some sort of kitchen or facility, there's things that are running, refrigeration and all this stuff. There are people trying to hack into that, because if that is compromised, then you can, what else can you get into in the network? So could you somehow get in through an unsecured camera, but then get access to the network that's running in that retail environment, and then be able to get into a payment system or get into some sort of customer system and then get data that's more valuable? So it might not be necessarily that taking over that camera is the most interesting or valuable thing from a bad actor standpoint, but what else they can get into, that's what we have to care about. So I think that's why we need to, again, the weakest point of entry is maybe not, again, what's going to, make it or break it from that device, but it could lead to something else. And so I think that's what we have to think about, and why we have to level up our thoughts around overall security architecture for the whole systems.
So if I've got that right, then although IoT devices, can be a game changer and be much more efficient, make our lives a lot easier and a lot more efficient, they also can make us incredibly vulnerable
Mhm.
in the long run. Is that right?
It is right. Yes. So if I think about some of the maybe guidelines that are coming out. So in the
Mm.
US, we have the US Cyber Trust Mark, which US government has discussed as a way to make consumers more aware of smart home devices that are buying, and are they secure. So it's almost like, again, in the US, we had this Energy Star label where it tells you how much energy is being used by an appliance. It's a similar kind of idea. If you go and buy a product and it says it's, been stamped with this certain level of security, then you know that that manufacturer has done something right, right? And that they are likely protecting their device and therefore protecting you and your network when you go and you install that security camera or that doorbell or that smart speaker into your home. So that's one thing that I've seen that's helping to drive the right behavior and from a consumer perspective have more awareness.
That's really interesting. And I wonder, just on I guess, a somewhat side note, it's interesting those changes have come in. And I wonder from a consumer perspective, if you've got, say, products from China, for example, or other countries where maybe the cost of production is much cheaper, that don't have the same standards, that don't have the same kind of frameworks or yeah, standards to uphold. And as a consumer, I can buy a product for $30, say, or I can buy a US stamped product for $50. For me, it's sort of going to be a no-brainer. If they both do the same thing, if they both kind of turn my light, if they're both smart lights, smart kettles, whatever it is. So what do you think is going to kind of push the needle from a consumer perspective then? Is it more education, more awareness, or what do you think we can do in that regard?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think for consumers, it is education and awareness. Even basic things like changing default passwords, which I think we have reiterated over and over for the past several years
Mm,
because we've heard stories about you know, you get your router, your home router, and it has a default password and it's written on the sticker on the back of the thing, and you type it in and then you never change it. So that I think we've gotten past that. Everybody knows that
mm,
that's it's the same thing in an app. If you've downloaded an app and there's a default password, you should change that. So I think starting with those basic things that consumers can control, which is really around passwords and password management, two-factor authentication, if that's available, that sort of thing is what I would always recommend to someone in the smart home, smart home consumer space. I think the this sort of labeling, right, of product is also something that the manufacturers of products are putting effort into because it should help their brand, and help them
mm.
be more successful, seen as a bit more of a premier brand, um, and have that level of extra security. So I think that I think again, yes, it is more conversations around why that's important. And again, it's back to what I was saying earlier. It's not just that one device itself, it's just what else can be reached within your system.
Mm, mm. And so that's a bit on the consumer side of things, what they can do to kind of bolster, enhance their security. But talking, I guess, kind of more broadly, what are the challenges we face with IoT security generally?
Yes. Yes. So I like to talk about consumer because people can understand it a bit more. It's close to home. No pun intended, maybe pun intended. But from a outside of consumer perspective and at Keyfactor, I get to work with a lot of industrial commercial companies. Um, so there the level of impact can be much higher. So if you're dealing with a hospital has purchased a lot of very powerful and expensive equipment, surgical robots, MRI machines. Any and all of those devices are collecting critical patient data, patient information, and images, right? That you don't want things to get mixed up. You don't want things to get taken and used for the wrong way. So that's a whole nother level. And then the hospital systems themselves, we hear a lot about people getting in and then having ransomware or basically saying, you need to pay X amount, and then we'll give you access back to your systems. And in some cases, I think there's insurance policies specifically for that, and people will just write a check. But as we improve our posture around cybersecurity within the systems and the management systems, and then also the devices, this is getting better over time. Um, so similar to the US Cyber Trust Mark, in Europe, we have a uh, act called the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA. So if you've heard of it, it's the objective of it is really to improve overall cybersecurity within EU, because the goal is what are some standards, guidelines, and best practices to make sure that all the products that are manufactured had this high level of security. And so that went into effect, and I believe there's a period of 24 to 36 months by which manufacturers need to start to comply, or they won't be able to ship product. So that's one thing where when a guideline and a standard becomes a regulation, that drives definitely different behavior in my mind, because it can impact the businesses, and people still want to sell their product and expand and make money. So CRI is one that we've been talking about a lot, especially with my European colleagues, and when I've go to European shows, it's definitely a big theme. Similar to like the NIS2 directive, if you've heard of that as well.
Mm.
So just throwing out a couple themes that people might want to look more deeply into, but just know, I think that the overall message would be, it's not just us in the cybersecurity vendor world saying this is a good thing to do. It's also these bodies, standards bodies, that are comprised of people from a bunch of different areas that are coming together and saying, we need to follow some guidelines here to make sure that we're protecting these really critical systems.
Sure. And I think it's interesting when you use the kind of the medical example, because I know your side of the pond, there was that big recent ransomware attack, wasn't it, with United Health, if I'm not mistaken. So I think anyone that kind of wants to do some reading on that hasn't kind of read on that, that's quite a real world example. If I'm not mistaken, it was a double ransomware attack as well, which is pretty scary. So these things, I guess, have pretty devastating consequences. What you're talking about there with the IoT devices specifically, when you were getting photos and very critical data, not just kind of names, dates of birth and addresses, when it's medical information, photographs and stuff like that. I think people are going to be much more concerned about photos that they don't want to be being revealed than maybe their address or some bank details that they can potentially change. And another thing I wanted to I guess bring up again that you mentioned was the insurance side of things. I think it's quite interesting how the CRA and the other kind of trademark, the other marks that have kind of come in, the role they're going to play in insurance. I think cyber insurance is a massively kind of interesting area anyway. And I know, having worked with a couple of insurance companies myself, obviously from a recruitment standpoint, they have kind of brought people in to go and test devices in their clients' sort of environments. And if they sort of allow them to do so and they can give them their sort of seal of approval, they will in turn lower their premiums, because I guess if they know everything in their environment secure, then obviously the risk is lower. So it'll be interesting to see how that translates into companies' willingness to adopt and engage and go through this sort of process, because I think cyber insurance, there's a lot of good like cyber insurance companies out there, but I think there's a lot of cyber insurers that are pulling out of offering cyber insurance because it's so hard to quantify the risk. And I think particularly when there's IoT, OT at play as well, surely there's going to be mounting pressure from insurance companies to, if we're going to provide you if we're going to underwrite you, if we're going to provide you with insurance, we need to ensure that everything's kind of rubber stamped, that everything's gold standard. Would you agree with that? Have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's definitely complex. I definitely agree that how to quantify it is the challenge, because if you think about, so you said hospital, another example could be a manufacturing facility where there's several different, production lines, and they're making, there's control systems that are part of that. There's HMI, there's computer interfaces, there's all sorts of things. There's switches and sensors and actuators and all of those things that come together to make a factory run. It's not all managed by, or the components are from different vendors, and they all need to communicate, and they all need to come back to some central system. So then you got to figure out probably protecting at multiple layers of that, right? So following a model where you have some sort of, within a level, these devices are allowed to talk to each other, and then you have to go through some to get to that next level, then these things can talk to these things. So it's establishing trust throughout the stack of devices that need to talk to each other. That's the way that I think about it. And then also if that factory in a global sense needs to communicate to another regional facility, or then back to like another continent, you said. So it's there's just multiple layers of complexity, but I definitely think that the philosophy of having an air gapped, no one can get into the factory, so I'm going to be totally offline and we're secure. Like that is gone to the wayside. That is no longer the philosophy. Because we know that, sure, if you're air gapped, that's fine. No one can sort of burst that balloon or that bubble. But once you get in, if there's no security within those different layers or the frameworks of the devices and the systems, then it's all over. So luckily, I don't think we're seeing very much of that anymore. People are realizing that we have to have security from within.
And on that, with I know the secure by design and cyber informed engineering standards that are out there, and the various other kind of standards and frameworks and whatnot coming out and being mandated, there's naturally going to be a bit of a lag. And I think is always the case with like this new exciting tech that comes out that promises to make our lives easier and save us a load of money. The adoption of this new technology isn't going to die down, and it's going to be some while before it's all kind of secure. Do you think there's enough kind of technology out there and companies such as Keyfactor that, are able to kind of keep pace with the increased adoption of these new IoT devices, which inevitably are going to be increasing the attack surface for companies?
Yes. So I think cybersecurity is a really fun place to be right now. And I think there's a bunch of different technologies that are important. So where I am, where Keyfactor is, and some of our competitors and colleagues is really focusing in on the certificates and the keys and how those are generated, because that's essentially like a passport, right? For each device to have an identity that's unique, but that is validated by an issuing authority, right? The country that you live in. And then that is trusted by other countries that you go to. So that's essentially what we're talking about, is like a digital passport, digital identity for every single thing but when that device got its identity, we know that it came from a real country. It's not a fake identity, and you're a real person. And so there's a whole process behind establishing certificates for devices that's part of what we do and what we offer. I think that knowledge of setting up identity and identity management for devices and systems is still emerging. Like when I talk to customers that are in connected vehicles or in the smart energy space, a smart building space, they know that this is the right way to put in a unique credential, and oftentimes they maybe don't have the expertise in-house in their engineering group or even their IT group. IT has more familiarity with certificates and keys, but in the product space, because again, we are taking the deep domain expertise of how to make a jet engine or how to make a wind turbine, and that's what the product groups know how to do very, very well. Now it's marrying that with the cybersecurity piece that we've been doing in the IT side of the house for years, and sort of putting those two things together. So long way of saying, yes, there's vendors like us that help, that can provide the infrastructure, that can do best practices, that we can help implement and configure. But I also do see product cybersecurity groups within companies evolving and growing and becoming more and more important. And some of the largest customers that we have teams of 20 to 30 people that are only focused on product cybersecurity. And that's really encouraging because systems are very complex. A vehicle has hundreds of thousands of lines of software code inside of it to make things run, to have different systems talk to each other. But the most important part is that those components and those things that are talking are validating that they know each other, that they can trust each other, and that they can exchange data and create a secure net like channel over whatever network they're communicating on, whatever bus they're on, whatever protocol they're on. So maybe a long way of saying, I think, yes, it's we as vendors here are offering this, but the people I work with are also, becoming very smart and starting to understand how to do this in the right way.
So I've understood that correctly as well. It sounds like we need to, or companies need to realize they need to nudge security closer to the product group and have security folks at the table working with the product from the get-go, so it's sort of baked in, not an afterthought that's kind of tacked on afterwards.
Yes, exactly. I think of security, and I was in product development for quite a long time. So you have product development checklists, and you have to build an initial product demo or beta, whatever you want to call it. And mechanical is important, electrical is important, design is important, software code, but security is also a really critical piece of that.
Mm.
So I think from the design phase, thinking about what does this device need to communicate with? How is it communicating over what type of channel? It could be private 5G, it could be cellular, it could be Wi-Fi. Like how that's a communication layer, but then how do how do you talk over that securely? We also have there's on the hardware side, there's chip vendors that are looking at how to make security chips that you can use to have a unique birth identity like built into that chip so that when you place it on your PCB, that you can use that as a starting point for creating a credential. So we work as a partner to chip and silicon vendors who are selling these, their parts to builders of things. So that I think is also helping because it gets people thinking at the start of PCB layout and functionality of the electronics. Okay, that you have a piece in here that can help you have that unique certificate and that unique way to connect to the device when it's done at the design phase instead of waiting to production, which we've all been there too. And it's like, oh, we've got a date, we've got to start running things, and then you aren't ready and you need to stand up some sort of issuing thing in the factory to be able to spit certificates out per every one of these widgets. And it's better to do it up front, right? To design it in from the beginning.
That's an interesting insight. Thanks for that. And we've covered a lot of ground already on the podcast, and obviously you've provided like a tremendous amount of sort of value and insight to us. I appreciate that, Alan. Have you got any sort of like closing or final thoughts? Anything else you wanted to kind of add so the listeners can kind of take away, go away and read, or at least kind of ponder over?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one thing I was thinking about as we were talking is in the world that I live in, that's again close to certificates and cryptography and encryption. We have been talking about the world of post-quantum for a while now. So post-quantum is kind of like back in the 1999 turning into 2000, like the Y2K, where there's going to be this event and then some systems are going to break because of, they don't have enough, the date is going to roll over. We talk here about when a quantum computer is available to run enough math algorithms to break the cryptography that is encrypting our systems today. If that is the case, or when that is the case, when a quantum computer is readily available, then the concern is that some of our systems can be hacked into, because our systems, like again, our healthcare or our water and gas and systems like that are encrypted, right? And our IT systems are encrypted, but it would take a regular computer a really long time to crack that code. But quantum computer should be much faster. And so that is a conversation that we did a lot of this at our security conference, RSA, where we were talking about how to be post-quantum ready as a user, as a company, as an operator. And so I think it's more awareness around that. And we in the cryptography community are following the standards that are coming out from NIST, where there is guidelines about making a post-quantum resistant or stronger algorithm, right? So there's just better math, stronger math. And again, I like math. That's way over my head. But something to think about is more when that happens in the future, how do you make sure you're aware and prevent your systems from getting compromised? And it probably means you need to swap out your cryptography that you've built into your systems. So for IoT, we talk about, if let's say you're a vehicle manufacturer, all your vehicles are produced and people are driving around them on the road, and then you need to change out the cryptography to make it post-quantum cryptography. How do you do that remotely, securely? Tell the car to call in, change out its algorithms. So it's more than just sending an over-the-air update of new software. Like your iPhone will get a software update and you say, yep, install tonight. It's the same sort of thing with vehicles and all of that. But how do you also push cryptography as part of that sort of update? So maybe a topic for a whole nother day, or maybe when it happens, we'll have a great conversation. But something to think of.
I was about to say that's fascinating. I'm sure we could do a podcast just on that. I think I'd need to do a ton of reading before we do that. I think as soon as you mentioned quantum, I was like, I'm just trying to hang in here. But yeah, fascinating. Something definitely I'm interested in learning more about. But Ellen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today, your insight, and yeah, I look forward to getting this one published.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much, David.